Home prices are extremely high, and President Donald Trump has a new solution: 50-year mortgages. Is that a good idea? Welcome to Sharpening Arrows, where we train teens to think biblically about life and politics. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Now, if you want to watch this show, we are on YouTube, youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows, youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows. And I'm just going to give you fair warning. There is a greater than 50% likelihood that I am interrupted multiple times today. So if you want to see that, if you enjoy watching me be embarrassed by my children photobomb, it's on YouTube. And hopefully it's not too chaotic and I have to delete the whole episode. I guess we'll find out. And as a reminder, the purpose of this show is to help teenagers think through issues. If you want to debate like Charlie Kirk, if you want to ask questions like Allie Beth Stuckey, you have to know the other side's arguments. You have to be able to understand what's appealing about what they believe. And I was listening to Allie Beth Stuckey recently, and she endorsed the show. Okay, she didn't endorse the show. She endorsed unknowingly the premise of this show when she said this: whether it's someone who agrees with me or not, I'm always playing devil's advocate. I'm always thinking about how I can hone my arguments better by thinking about what would someone say to this. And so I encourage you to do that with me, but you've got to do that with everyone, especially when they're making really important and impactful claims. What could be the other side of this argument? Thank you, Allie. Yes, I agree 100%. Take it from her. If you want to understand an issue well, you've got to think about what the other side thinks. And today we're going to do that on the topic of 50-year mortgages. Wow. Now, before you tune out and say that's a long time, which it is, let's talk a little bit about housing, because the reason we're talking about mortgages is because people want to own homes. And let's understand that. And another thing that's a little different on this show is we have breaks in the show where I encourage you to stop the podcast and discuss this as a family, as parents and teenagers or preteens. Discuss these pause point questions. Here's our first one. Do you think you'll ever want to buy a home someday? Well, most people do. They do want to, but it's becoming hard to actually do that. The median age of first-time homebuyers is now 40. And if you don't remember what median is, that's the middle. So if you take all the people who bought homes from everyone from 18 to 98, the amount in the middle is 40. So half the homebuyers are 40 or older, half of them are 40 and younger. But that was only first-time homebuyers. Among all buyers, the median age was 59. Homebuyers are more likely now to be near or at a retirement age than young married parents. Now, that may seem odd, and it wasn't always like this. In 1991, the median age of first-time homebuyers was 28, and it's generally been around 30 for decades. Consider this. In 2017, the median age of first-time homebuyers was 32. It's now 2025, and the median age is 40, which means it's the same group of buyers. 8 years ago, the median age was 32. Today, the median age is 40. It's the same cohort of people. All right, let's have this pause point question. Why do people want to buy a home? Whether you want to or not, why do you think people want to buy a home? And parents, why did you buy a home if you are a home owner? All right, so before we go any further, let's look at one reason that people are struggling to buy a home. Now, in a topic like housing, there are always many factors. Okay, so I never, just because we talk about one factor doesn't mean these other factors don't exist. We have things like interest rates. They're higher, which makes the monthly payments more expensive. You have things like increased demand. There's just physically more people in the country. But probably the biggest reason people are struggling to buy homes is the price. In 1970, teens, before you were alive, before your parents may even have been alive, the average home price was $26,000. Excuse me, I think this is the median price. $26,000. In 1980, it was $65,000. In 1990, it was $126,000. So do you see that? From 1970, it was $26,000. 1990 is $126,000. So you had a $100,000 increase there in 20 years. 2000 is 165, and we kind of kept increasing by about another 80,000 to 2010, $223,000. So again, if you go back to 1970, that's almost 10 times as much, 9 times higher in 2010. But the prices didn't stop there. In 2020, the median home price was $329,000. 2022, it was $438,000. Wow, that is a lot of money. Now it's come down slightly since then. It's around $410,000 right now. But I just want you to notice this. From 1970 to 1990, it took 20 years to increase home prices by $100,000. But from 2020 to 2022, prices jumped by $100,000. That's a major concern, and those prices are a reason that people are struggling to buy homes, especially first-time home buyers. All right, let's have a pause point. Does it benefit society for people to own a home? Now, I don't mean the homeowner. I don't mean the family. I don't mean the person. I mean, does it benefit society more broadly for people to purchase a home that they live in? Now, you probably know that owning a home, or at least the realistic possibility of doing so, has long been an essential part of the American dream. But I want you to think about the effects it has on other people, on society. Homeownership settles people in communities. It encourages married couples to have more children. It builds family wealth. It promotes long-term thinking. And the reason is that if you know that you are going to be in a neighborhood, you care about what happens in that neighborhood. You care about the zoning. You care about the park. You know you're not just here for 6 weeks or 6 months. You're probably going to be here for 6 years, maybe 60 years. What happens in that neighborhood matters. If someone nearby is having a hard time, if someone's yard is a trash heap, you don't just think, oh, well, I'll be gone soon. You think, hey, something's going on. This is my neighborhood. You know, this is something that libertarians often overlook or give too little consideration of. People aren't merely units of economic activity that only interact with others when our mutual financial interests align. We're human beings who long for healthy relationships, starting with our families and extending to those around us. Home ownership helps cultivate these relationships. So home ownership is very important. It's important for many individuals as a step to adulthood, as a way to create wealth, but it's also important for communities. All right, this is a long way of introducing a new idea proposed by President Donald Trump, a 50-year mortgage. Now, currently, most mortgages are either 15 years or 30 years. On True Social, Trump suggested this, and then U.S. Director of Federal Housing Bill Pulte wrote on X, quote, "A 50-year mortgage is simply a potential weapon in a wide arsenal of solutions that we are developing right now," end quote. All right, let's have a pause point. Do you know how a mortgage works? And I don't want you to be embarrassed or like, oh, yeah, of course I do, because everyone, I've heard this term mortgage. There's a huge world out there. God knows it all. We don't know it all. And so if there's ever a term, if there's ever something, and this is one of the reasons I gave so much background on this issue, is you have to kind of know what's going on. What are all the pieces to have an informed view of the policy? So let's just talk about mortgages. And if you already know, you can skip ahead for a minute. Say a house costs $400,000. A traditional mortgage requires 20% down. So that's an $80,000 down payment. And then the bank gives you a loan over a set period of time, usually 15 or 30 years, and you pay back the loan. So even though you are called the homeowner and you live there and you have the expectation of if you stayed there and kept making your payments that you would own the home outright, the bank actually holds the deed to the house because that's their collateral for the loan. You can't just give someone $400,000 or $320,000 and say, "All right, I take your word for it." No, they keep what's called the title to the home, and then once you finish the loan, then you get that. Okay, so you can see the barriers here to home ownership. First of all, $80,000 is a lot of money. Now, there are lower down payment options, but those are riskier for the lender. So people who pay less than 20% down pay private mortgage insurance. And then there's the cost of interest. So at 6%, that's around the current interest rate on $320,000, you're paying $19,200 in interest. Just in interest. So that's almost $20,000 in interest on the median priced home. Now at 3% interest, it's a little less than $10,000 a year. So you can see that there's a big difference in interest. If the interest rates are high, the payments become much higher. Now, what the 50-year mortgage would do is it would repay what's called the principal. So that's not just the interest, that's the actual amount that you owe. That $320,000 that you owe is called the principal. And when you start paying that down, you actually owe less in interest because your loan amount is reducing. And so what a longer loan term does is it reduces your monthly payment because you're paying back less principal. And so a 50-year mortgage will lower payments. Let's give a little specific example. And I apologize for all the numbers, but I just want you to get a sense of this. This is from ABC News comparing a 15, 30, and 50-year mortgage on a $300,000 home with 5% down and a 5% interest rate. Now, in a 15-year loan, the monthly payment is $2,250, and someone would pay a total amount of interest of $105,000. Okay, so $300,000 home, pay about $100,000 in interest on a 15-year loan. Okay, now let's go to a 30-year loan. Well, your monthly payment drops to just over $1,500, so you have about $700 a month savings in payment. But remember, you're making payments for twice as long. And so on that $300,000 house, you're going to pay $250,000 in interest. Whoa, that's a big difference. So that $700 a month turns into an extra savings, turns into an extra $150,000 cost. Now, what about a 50-year loan? Well, your payment's going to drop to $1,300 a month. So again, that's a lot less. That's almost $1,000 less than a 15-year loan. But your total interest is going to jump to almost $500,000. So well over as much as you paid for the house and 50%. And that's about not quite, but almost 5 times as much interest on a 50-year loan as on a 15-year loan. All right, now, so before we get into the arguments for and against, let me tell you about Mama Bear Prayers, a podcast for moms who are knee-deep in dishes and training their teens. Whether you are in the carpool lane or the coffee line, host Charity Rios wants to come alongside you and help you grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. Now, as every parent knows, raising kids can feel a bit like a ping pong game. You bounce from moments of joy to moments of deep concern. Combine this with the busyness of life, and this back and forth can leave you feeling overwhelmed and even isolated. And as the mom of 4 busy boys, Charity knows this firsthand. And it's why she created Mama Bear Prayers, to support moms who are on the journey of raising kids. God works through prayer, so check out Mama Bear Prayers today. All right, so let's start, as we always do on this podcast, with arguments for the side I personally disagree with. We'll rebut those arguments and then make the case for the side that I agree with. And remember, if you disagree with me, that's okay. I won't be offended. And hopefully this gives you something to think about. So arguments for the wrong side, which in this case is arguments for the 50-year mortgage. 1, Trump is a financial genius. Trust him. He works in real estate. That's how he made himself a billionaire. Not only that, he oversaw the creation of a great economy in his first term. He's made a lot of progress on the economy already in his second term. If Trump says this will help, it will help. You can't trust the media. The media doesn't like him. The media hasn't given him a fair shake. The media has been lying about him for a decade now. You can't trust the media's criticism. Trust Trump. Argument number 2. This will make home buying more affordable, more possible. Why can't young people buy a home? Well, we just heard all the numbers. They can't afford the payment. Look at this. A $2,300 a month payment on a $300,000 house. First of all, it's hard in many places to find a $300,000 house. And then that $2,300 a month payment doesn't include mortgage insurance, doesn't include property tax, doesn't include all your utilities. To get into a home, young people have to have lower payments. That's what the 50-year mortgage does. And most people don't even pay off their homes. They move in 6 or 8 or 10 years. They upgrade, they downgrade. What the 50-year mortgage does is it gives more people access to homes and the ability to build equity in their home. Now, again, what is equity? I think that's important, so I want to explain it. Equity is the difference between how much your home is worth and how much you owe on the loan. So if your home is worth $300,000 and your loan, you've paid it down to $200,000, you have $100,000 in equity. And equity becomes very important because if you were able to buy a home at 30, maybe you have 2 kids, and by the time you're 38, you have 4 kids. Well, guess what? You're probably going to want a bigger home, and that equity, that wealth that you've built up in your first home can help you buy a larger home. All right, those are the 2 main arguments in favor of the 50-year mortgage. Let's have another pause point. Which of the great 8 questions do you think applies here? Remember, the great 8 questions are 8 questions that we put in our mental toolbox to help us examine issues as they come along. Question 1, what happens next? Question 2, has this been tried before? Question 3, is there a principle involved? Question 4, what are the trade-offs? Question 5, what do you mean by that? Question 6, is this an appeal to emotion or logic? Question 7, am I focused on the speaker or the argument? And question 8, what does the Bible say? All right, so pick your question. Think about how we would attack these arguments. And remember, there's lots of ways to attack arguments. So just because I didn't choose the question you did does not mean you are wrong. All right, so this first argument is that we should trust Trump because of his financial genius and track record. That leads us right to question 7. Am I focused on the speaker or the argument? Okay, this is really important, especially when it comes to politics. I encourage you to use your mind. Don't outsource your thinking to anyone, not to me, not to my daughter who came into the picture. And especially don't do it to a politician. Okay, and the reason is that politicians very often have other motives. So it's not just about what's the best financial advice. Okay, Cambria, I need you to go now. Yes, Dad. Yes, Dad. It's not just about what's the best financial advice for people. It could be something where they need to show action. They need to convince the voters that they're doing a good job. Okay. And so you've got to think through an issue. Now, yes, can we have a more favorable opinion of certain politicians because of their track record of being honest or being insightful? Absolutely. But unless it is the Bible, keep thinking about what is saying, what someone's motivation is, and don't just trust the speaker. Look at the argument. All right, so argument number 2 here is that a 50-year mortgage would lower monthly payments, and so that would allow more people access to homes. Okay, maybe, but let's go to question 1. What happens next? And I want you to think about this. This is really important in economic issues, is you have to remember that the economy is dynamic. And what that means is that if you change one thing in the economy, then there's going to be lots of other things that change in reaction to that one thing. And so let's say we had a 50-year mortgage, and all of a sudden there were lots of young people, lots of 28-year-olds, lots of 30-year-olds who look at this and say, wow, I can now afford to buy a new home. And so if you have the same amount of supply and a lot of new potential buyers, what happens to prices? They go up. That is basic supply and demand. And so this idea that, well, we're going to make homes more affordable, we're going to make them more accessible, that would only be true if very few people use the 50-year mortgage. But if all of a sudden you have spiked demand while supply stays steady, prices are going to go up, which is going to negate the whole purpose of the 50-year mortgage. And then look a little further down the road. Look at the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. As it turns out, giving cash-strapped buyers greater access to overpriced homes doesn't end well. What it does is it creates a housing bubble, a bubble that one day burst, leaving a lot of people having to move out of their homes when they didn't want to. And then another ripple effect is that in those years, there was dramatic reduction in home construction. And that's one reason we don't have enough single-family homes to this day. There's another of the grade 8 we should apply here. What are the trade-offs? Okay, trade-offs is just a fancy economic term for saying you can't have it all. If I go to In-N-Out for dinner, I can't go to Cafe Rio for dinner. I'm going to one place. And the thing with the trade-off that's really important to understand is there can be something good about both things. And so with a trade-off, you're having to choose between between two things, but that doesn't mean that everything that you don't pick is terrible. If I go to In-N-Out, I'll enjoy a hamburger. If I went to Cafe Rio, I would enjoy a burrito. I would enjoy both of those things. Okay, but I can only choose one. So we have to think about the trade-offs. And let's bring it back to 50-year mortgages. The people who are financially savvy enough to correctly use a 50-year mortgage don't need one in almost every circumstance. On the other hand, for normal people who aren't financial wizards, the 50-year mortgage removes any realistic expectation of eventual home ownership. For most Americans, it would resemble an indefinite lease with massive downside risk if the housing market drops. And when prices are at record highs, that's the time in the next few years when it's very likely the housing market will drop. The 50-year mortgage simply isn't good policy. But that does leave us with a conundrum. Home prices are still too high. We still need people. We need you as teenagers to have a realistic possibility of owning a home. I have 7 kids in my home. They aren't all going to be able to get married and have kids and live at home. They need to go. They need to go out. Not immediately. Not yet. Sorry, teenager. You're not leaving the house yet. but someday you will leave the house. And I would like you to have a realistic chance of owning a home. So let's have a pause point. What would bring housing prices down? Okay, remember there's two main factors when it comes to the price. We have the demand. How many people want the product? Well, lots of people want to buy a home because there are lots of people in the United States. And that leads us to the first thing that we should do, which is deport illegal immigrants. A rapid surge in population is problematic in housing because demand for housing is inelastic. That's a fancy economic term meaning buyers don't adjust their demand for a product much, even as prices soar. This makes sense. Everyone moving here needs a place to live. But new housing, even apartments, takes time and money. There are constraints such as federal land ownership. And so what we had during the Biden administration is we had this huge influx of illegal immigrants. We had this huge influx in the demand for housing. And no surprise, housing prices shot up. Now, were there other factors there? Inflationary factors? Absolutely. But illegal immigration was one of them. And if we can reduce the number of illegal immigrants living in the country, housing prices will be lower, everything else held equal. And that gets us to the second solution, the second needed course of action. Build more homes. And this is the key. It's the reason that rent control is so damaging, because rent control stops new construction, or at least limits it. In 2024, approximately 1.4 million homes were started nationally. Shortly before his assassination, Charlie Kirk called for building 10 million homes for Americans. Now, that level of increase in supply would significantly lower prices. While the federal government can't change local zoning laws, that's one of the other complicating things about housing policy. Is hang on a second, Tegan. Is that there's different layers of government that have their fingers in the pie. Okay, can you please go tell mommy? It's okay. I'm sorry. My son is telling me about my other children who are playing with a praying mantis, but they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. Okay, I promise. That big, a very big praying mantis. All right. What did I tell you? Like I say, that there's my pitch for YouTube. YouTube.com/@sharpening arrows. You can see my children come and embarrass me, or at least interrupt the podcast. All right. So what the federal government can do is it can release millions of acres of the federal land that it owns that's already close to existing metro areas. Around Las Vegas, there's lots of barren desert. It's owned by the federal government. This is not land inside a national park. This is just barren desert that should be released so that people can build more homes. Trump's tariffs have also increased prices on building materials, at least on those supplies where U.S. production can't be spun up quickly. Reducing tariffs would help lower cost. Another idea is that the federal government could offer construction companies tax incentives for completing starter homes. All right, final pause point here. Who would be upset about a rapid drop in housing prices? Now, I want you to think about that, because when we talk about trade-offs, this is a real trade-off. Say you bought a home for $500,000 and all of a sudden there's this massive unexpected increase in home construction, and now your home's value is only $300,000. I think you would rightfully feel upset, maybe even worried. What happens if I have to move out of state with a job transfer? Am I going to be underwater on my home? That is a real trade-off. And I think it's very important, especially in economic arguments, to acknowledge that there are real trade-offs. But when home prices are so high, when we already have basically a housing bubble, when home ownership is so inaccessible, it's a trade-off that's worth it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube or subscribe on your podcast app. And if you enjoyed this show, share it with a friend. Tell them about it and help them sharpen their arrows as well. Be courageous like Charlie, stay sharp, and give God the glory. I'll see you next time.